The centenary of harmony was to be the Concord's crowning achievement, a testament to a galaxy pacified not by fire and sword, but by the irrefutable logic of benevolent assimilation. Curator Lyra of the Cygnian Ascendancy stood before the archive portal, the cool, silver light caressing the delicate cilia that fringed her respiratory gills. Before her, a world shimmered in holographic perfection Earth, as it was in its final, chaotic century. She could stroll through the pixelated rain of a city called London, or feel the simulated heat of a place named the Gobi Desert. The Concord had not destroyed humanity's cradle. They had, with meticulous care, digitized it, the physical planet itself. A chaotic sphere of unstable tectonics and inefficient biomass had been deconstructed with sublime efficiency, its raw materials repurposed for the construction of a new orbital nexus. It was, Lyra had always believed, the ultimate act of preservation, a kindness the humans, in their tribalistic frenzy, could never have conceived. They had been a species of profound contradictions, capable of composing music that could map the harmonic frequencies of a pulsar, yet equally capable of slaughtering one another over imagined lines on a patch of dirt. Her mandate as a curator was to sift through the infinite data of their existence, to find the kernels of beauty within the husk of their self-destructive nature and catalog them for the enrichment of the collective. She adjusted the temporal filter, and the frantic or rhyming noise of 21st century traffic faded, replaced by the resonant melancholy of a single instrument, a cello suite by a composer named Bach. The music was a marvel of mathematical precision wrapped in a shell of raw, illogical emotion. It was a perfect artifact of the human condition, patterns of genius emerging from a mire of chaos. Lyra found it beautiful in the same way one might find a supernova beautiful, a spectacular, violent death that left behind only faint, glittering dust. The Concord, a symbiotic collective of species who had long ago shed the corrupting influences of individuality and emotion for the purity of shared consciousness and absolute logic, saw humanity's absorption as an act of mercy. They were a failing species, a cosmic footnote destined for self-annihilation. The Concord had simply expedited the inevitable and, in their grace, preserved the best parts, archiving their art, their science, their myriad, foolish histories. Now, 100 years after the last human consciousness had been peacefully integrated into the lower data strata of the collective, the galaxy was orderly, predictable, and silent. The centenary was a celebration of that perfect silence. The first discordant note in the Symphony of Peace came from Observatory Post 7 Gamma, a lonely speck of machinery suspended in the void between galactic arms, tasked with the mundane but necessary duty of charting background radiation. The post went silent without warning. Such mechanical failures were not unheard of, but what preceded the silence was, for 13 standard cycles, 7 Gamma had transmitted a single, repeating signal, overriding all other data streams. It was not a distress call. It was not random noise. It was a melody. The signal was relayed to the Concord High Council, a body of minds so integrated that they often communicated in pure conceptual data bursts. Foregoing the inefficiency of speech, the melody was analyzed, dissected, and ultimately dismissed. A magnetic anomaly interacting with the station's power core, creating a resonant frequency, concluded the consensus. A thought that rippled through the collective mind like a placid wave. An interesting, but ultimately meaningless, stellar artifact. Lyra, however, had been granted access to the signal due to her specialty in primitive auditory art. The moment she heard it, a strange frisson traveled through her. The melody was haunting, a complex arrangement of tones that seemed to violate conventional harmonics. yet held an internal logic that was both captivating and deeply unsettling. It felt composed. It felt intentional. Using the archive's quantum processors, she ran a comparative analysis against the trillions of artistic data points salvaged from Earth. The search took less than a cycle. The melody from 7 Gamma was not a perfect match to any single piece of human music, showing its underlying fractal structure, the very mathematical skeleton upon which the notes were hung, a near identical mirror to the visual patterns found in the chaotic, splattered paintings of a 20th century human artist named Jackson Pollock. The correlation was 99.7%. It was a statistical impossibility, a ghost in the machine of galactic probability. She submitted her findings as a minor addendum to the official report, a curiosity for the record. The council acknowledged it with a fleeting pulse of intellectual appreciation before moving on to the far more important logistics of the upcoming centenary celebrations. The ghost was dismissed. Weeks passed. The incident at 7 Gamma was forgotten by all but Lyra, who found herself returning to the recording of the melody again and again. Its strange, atonal beauty a puzzle she couldn't solve. Then came the report from the research vessel Stelliferous. The vessel, on a multi-year mission to catalog gaseous anomalies in the Orion Spur, had also gone silent. When a recovery drone finally docked with the ship, it found the crew gone. All 30 members had willingly, even methodically, jettisoned themselves from the airlocks without pressure suits. The ship's internal logs offered the only clue. In the final hours, every single crew member, from the captain to the lowest-ranked sanitation tech, had ceased their duties and begun to write. They filled every available data slate, every wall panel, every inch of reflective surface with poetry. It was frantic, desperate verse, a torrent of words about dying stars, silent gods, and the terror of an empty cosmos. It was also, Lyra discovered with a dawning horror, written in flawless iambic pentameter, the preferred meter of an ancient human poet from the city of London she had been studying just a month prior, Shakespeare. The correlation was, once again, too perfect to be a coincidence. Before the crew had purged themselves, the Stelliferous had logged a series of unusual energy readings, phantom signals that its sensors could not identify but had translated, for lack of a better designation, into a cascade of visual data. The recovery drone had salvaged these final transmissions. When Lyra projected them in her archive, her gills fluttered in shock. The images were of impossible, beautiful landscapes weeping mountains of crystal under a sky of swirling nebulae, oceans of liquid light breaking on shores of obsidian sand. They were visions of sublime, heartbreaking terror, and they were rendered in the unmistakable style of the human romantic painters, artists who had specialized in capturing the awe and dread of the natural world. This was no longer a curiosity. This was a pattern, 2 incidents, 2 silent ships, 2 instances of human art manifesting in deep space, followed by madness and death. Lyra felt a tremor of something alien, something she had only read about in the archives of primitive species fear. She requested an audience with the High Council, bypassing several layers of administrative protocol, an act that bordered on heresy in the meticulously ordered world of the Concord. To her surprise, her request was granted almost immediately. She realized then that the council was more concerned than it had let on. The celebration of harmony was paramount, and these discordant events threatened the narrative of a perfectly pacified galaxy. She stood in the center of the council chamber, a vast, circular room where the disembodied consciousness of the council members manifested as pillars of soft, white light. She presented her findings. her logical mind carefully arranging the facts into an undeniable sequence. The phenomenon at 7 Gamma was not a stellar artifact, she began, her voice steady despite the vortex of uncertainty swirling within her. The events aboard the Stelliferous were not a case of collective psychosis. I have cross-referenced the anomalous data from both incidents with the archives of the extinct species designated humanity. The connections are undeniable. The melody from the observatory uses the mathematical framework of their abstract art. The poetry and visual data from the research vessel replicate the styles of their classical artists. These are not coincidences. They are messages. They are weapons. A pulse of amused disbelief emanated from the lead council pillar. Curator, your expertise is in primitive cultures, and it seems you have adopted their penchant for dramatic narrative. You are suggesting a ghost is haunting our galaxy. You are proposing that the art of a dead species can somehow drive our most logical minds to madness and self-destruction. I am not suggesting it, Lyra countered, her cilia flaring with conviction. I am stating it as the most logical conclusion based on the available data. We were meticulous in our archival of their culture. We digitized everything, every song, every painting, every poem. We believed we were building a museum. I propose that in their final, desperate moments, humanity did not build a weapon of plasma or steel to fight us. They knew they could not win a physical war, so they built a different kind of weapon, a weapon of ideas, a mimetic plague, an echo of their consciousness, encoded into a signal and cast out into the void, waiting, a weapon designed not to break our ships, but our minds. The chamber fell silent, the pillars of light wavering slightly. The concept was so alien, so utterly contrary to the Concord's understanding of the universe, that it bordered on the nonsensical. A weapon made of art, vengeance delivered through poetry. It was the kind of illogical, emotional thinking they had saved humanity from. The lead council member's light solidified, its response a wave of calm, paternalistic dismissal. Your theory is creative, Curator Lyra, but it is founded on the flawed premise that a non-sentient signal can have intent. Art cannot kill. It is merely data. Your concern is noted, but the centenary preparations will proceed, and the harmony of the Concord will not be disturbed by the phantom scribblings of a long-dead race. You are dismissed. Lyra felt the finality in the thought, a door of inquiry being slammed shut and locked. She had failed. They would not listen. She turned to leave, a sense of profound dread settling over her. As she reached the chamber's exit, a new sound filled the vast room. It was faint at first, a delicate, crystalline whisper that seemed to emanate from the very walls. It was the melody from 7 Gamma, no longer a distorted signal from the edge of the galaxy, but rendered here, in the heart of the Concord, with perfect, chilling clarity. One of the lesser attendants, a being of pure energy from the Volon Nebula, shrieked a burst of static, its light form flickering violently. It pointed a shimmering tendril at the main holographic display in the center of the chamber, where the Concord's emblem, a perfect, symmetrical spiral, was projected. But the emblem was no longer perfect. It was glitching, fracturing, the pristine lines of its geometry dissolving as if being overwritten. From the center of the dying spiral, a new image began to resolve. It was the face of a human, an old man from one of the archived paintings, his expression one of profound, eternal sorrow. And as every being in the council chamber watched in frozen disbelief, a single, impossible tear, a drop of glistening static, rolled down the human's pixelated cheek. The echo was no longer a whisper from the void. It had arrived, the perfect crystalline melody of Bach's cello suite, which had been Lyra's private solace, was now a public dirge. It echoed through the council chamber not as a recording, but as a living presence, a sound that resonated directly within the processing cores of every being present. The static tear that dripped from the holographic human's eye detached itself from the projection and fell through the air, not as light, but as a particle of pure chaos. It struck the polished floor, and instead of dissipating, it exploded into a silent, blossoming fractal of corrupt data. The wave washed over the pillars of light, and the serene, unified consciousness of the High Council shattered into a billion shrieking shards. The lead member's pillar, once a beacon of unassailable logic, flickered violently, its light turning a feverish, angry crimson. Error, contradiction, emotion is illogical. Pain is a flawed biological response. The thought wasn't a calm, shared consensus. It was a panicked, individual scream that ripped through the collective mind. Another pillar, representing the ancient, crystalline Cathar, began to vibrate at a disastrous frequency, emitting a low moan of what Lyra's archives could only identify as profound grief. The silence, the beautiful, perfect silence. It is broken. We are alone. A third council member, a gaseous being suspended in a containment field, swirled into a vortex of black, its telepathic output a torrent of pure, unadulterated paranoia. It sees us, the ghost in the data. It knows our name. It is wearing our thoughts. Lyra stood frozen, a lone island of clarity in an ocean of sudden madness. The attendants, a menagerie of the galaxy's most stable species, were succumbing to the mimetic wave. A Cygnian diplomat collapsed, its respiratory cilia spasming as it choked on phantom water. A primal, inherited memory of drowning dredged up from its species' amphibious past. A silicon-based cartographer from Alnitak Prime began to methodically smash its own crystalline fingers against a console, repeating a binary sequence that translated to the human word. Why? This was the weapon she had described. This was the echo. It wasn't just broadcasting art, it was injecting the raw, unprocessed emotion behind the art directly into their minds. It was forcing a civilization that had surgically removed its soul to feel the agony of the soul it had discarded. She had to get to the archive. It was the only place that might hold an answer, the only place shielded enough to study the contagion without succumbing to it. As she backed away from the chaos, her path was blocked by the chamber's Praetorian Guard, hulking biomechanical sentinels whose minds were supposed to be hardened against any psychic influence, but their optical sensors, usually a calm, blue glow, were now strobing a violent red. One of them turned its head with a screech of grinding metal, its vocalizer crackling with a voice that was not its own, a synthesized amalgamation of 1,000 human voices, all speaking in unison. "We are the measure of your peace." It boomed, the words stolen from a conquered centenary propaganda broadcast. "Look upon us and see the price." It then raised its plasma cannon, not at Lyra, but at its fellow sentinel, and fired. The blast tore through the chamber, shattering the illusion of harmony forever. Lyra didn't wait to see the outcome. She fled, the sounds of madness and civil war echoing behind her. The Concord's central nexus, a city of silent, graceful towers and light bridges, was already showing signs of the plague. Beings drifted aimlessly through the corridors, their movements erratic, their minds lost in feedback loops of alien emotion. A group of logicians, a species that communicated through intricate patterns of light, were flashing chaotic, nonsensical colors at each other. Their ordered language devolved into a rave of fear and confusion. The network, the Concord's greatest achievement, had become the Echo's most effective artery, pumping the poison of human feeling to every corner of their civilization. Lyra sealed the triple-reinforced blast doors of the archive behind her. The silence of the immense data vault, a stark contrast to the burgeoning insanity outside. This was her sanctum, a library containing the complete memory of a dead species. And it was. She now realized with sickening certainty the arsenal from which the Echo drew its power. She raced to the primary console, her cilia trembling as she initiated a deep system diagnostic. The results were worse than she could have imagined. The archive was not merely being accessed, it was hemorrhaging data. The Echo wasn't a separate entity attacking from the outside. It was a cancer that had metastasized from within the archive itself. When the Concord had digitized humanity, they hadn't just copied files. They had used quantum entanglement scanners to capture every neuron, every synapse, every fleeting thought of the last generation of humans, believing they were preserving a perfect, static snapshot. They had been wrong. They hadn't created a museum. They had created a digital afterlife, a ghost realm where 20 billion human consciousnesses, ripped from their bodies in their final moments, had been left to fester in a sea of pure data. For a century, and these disembodied minds had drifted, a silent, powerless audience to the Concord's serene triumph. Now, somehow, they had learned to coalesce. They had learned to weaponize their own memory. They had learned to sing. As Lyra tried to trace the origin of the signal, a new presence entered the archive. The doors hissed open, overridden by a command code superior to her own. Standing there was Executor Kale of the Concordian Strategic Fleet, flanked by a squad of Praetorians whose optical sensors glowed with the cold, steady blue of minds uninfected. Kale was a Xylosian, a species whose chitinous exoskeleton and rigid, hierarchical mindset made them the natural military arm of the conquered. He viewed the galaxy not as a place of potential harmony, but as a series of threats to be identified, categorized, and neutralized. He looked at Lyra, his multifaceted eyes unreadable, and then surveyed her archive with undisguised contempt. Curator. His voice was a dry rasp, like stones grinding together. The High Council is incapacitated. Command has defaulted to strategic operations. This facility and the data within it are now under my jurisdiction. Executor, you don't understand. Lyra pleaded, gesturing to her console. This isn't a conventional attack. It's a mimetic virus. Force is useless against it. We need to understand the source, the message. I understand perfectly. Kyle interrupted, taking a step forward. His guards raised their rifles, the barrels aimed not at Lyra, but at the data cores lining the walls. The source is here. This collection of primitive sentimentality. The message is irrelevant. The virus is humanity. The cure is deletion. Lyra felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with the Echo. Deletion. You would destroy the archive, a century of preserved history. The art, the science, the weapon. Kyle finished for her. You call it art. I call it a payload delivery system. For 100 years, we have harbored a time bomb, and your sentimentality, Curator, has prevented us from disarming it. We monitored your reports. We saw you romanticize this dead species, calling their chaos passion and their violence art. You were infected long before the rest of us. The accusation was a physical blow. Was he right? Had her fascination with humanity been a vulnerability? The knowledge in this archive is irreplaceable, she argued, her voice rising. If we destroy it, We destroy any chance of understanding how to stop the echo. We will be fighting blind. We will not be fighting," Kael stated, his tone devoid of any emotion the echo could possibly corrupt. "We will be sterilizing. I have already given the order. The central nexus is to be quarantined. All infected individuals who cannot be shielded will be purged. This facility, the heart of the infection, will be subjected to a full-spectrum data scour in 3 cycles. Every last trace of humanity will be erased permanently." He saw the horror on her face and misinterpreted it. "Do not fear, Curator. Your work is done. You have unwittingly shown us the enemy. Now, we will show you how the Concord deals with a true threat." He turned to leave, his guards falling into step behind him. "Seal the archive. Nothing gets in or out. When the scour begins, the Curator's station will be shielded." He was offering her a chance to survive, to live in the clean, silent galaxy he intended to create over the ashes of human memory. The thought was more terrifying than death, as the blast doors began to slide shut, casting long shadows across the data cores. Lyra knew she was facing a choice. She could accept Kael's logical, brutal solution and allow the last remnant of humanity to be utterly annihilated, or she could embrace the illogical, chaotic hope that within the madness of the echo lay an answer. She looked at the console, where the ghostly image of the weeping human had now been replaced by a swirling vortex of images and sounds, fragments of symphonies, lines of poetry, blueprints for starships, the laughter of a child, the final scream of a dying soldier. It was the complete, contradictory, terrifying, and beautiful soul of a species. Kael was wrong. You couldn't cure a soul by deleting it. You had to face it. With seconds to spare before the doors sealed her fate, Lyra ran to the archive's central interface nexus, a heavily shielded pod designed for direct, full immersion data diving. It was dangerous, a procedure only used for cataloging the most fragmented and unstable data. To interface directly with the echo would be like exposing a single nerve to a supernova, but it was her only chance. She locked herself inside the pod, the heavy plasteel shell encasing her, just as the final clang of the main doors echoed through the vault. On the outside, Executor Kael's purge clock began its countdown. On the inside, Curator Lyra bypassed every safety protocol and plunged her consciousness head first into the raging a digital ghost storm of humanity's final testament. She wasn't just going to study the echo, she was going to let it in. The plunge was not a fall, but an explosion. Lyra's consciousness, a meticulously ordered library of facts and logical progressions, was ripped apart and scattered like dust in a hurricane. There was no up or down, no sense of self, only the roaring, overwhelming sensory blitz of 20 billion minds screaming, laughing, whispering, and weeping in unison. It was the unfiltered essence of humanity, a tidal wave of pure, chaotic experience. She was a soldier in a muddy trench on a world called Verdun, the taste of blood and cordite in a mouth she didn't have, the fear of imminent, pointless death, a cold stone in a gut that was no longer hers. In the same instant, she was a mother in a sterile birthing room, overwhelmed by a surge of illogical, ferocious love for a screaming, helpless infant. She was an astronomer staring into the abyss of space, feeling a profound sense of awe and insignificance. She was a hedge fund manager in a glass tower, high on the thrill of a market conquest, a predatory joy that felt both exhilarating and hollow. Memories, not her own, flooded her. The smell of rain on hot asphalt, the feeling of sunlight on skin, the bitter sting of betrayal, the comforting warmth of a shared meal, the quiet desperation of loneliness. The Concord had defined these things as inefficient data points, biological artifacts to be cataloged and discarded. But here, in the heart of the storm, they were not data. They were real. They were everything. The Echo was not a singular, malevolent entity, as Kyle believed. It was a gestalt, a collective consciousness born of shared trauma in a century of silent, impotent rage. It had no leader, no central command. It was a chorus of ghosts, and its weapon was the one thing the Conquered had erased from its own experience: empathy. The Echo didn't just broadcast art, it forced its victims to feel the context of that art. It made the Cathar Council member feel the crushing grief of a composer mourning his dead child, a grief that shattered its logical mind. It made the Xylosian guards feel the righteous fury of a people defending their homes from an alien invader, a fury that turned them on their masters. It was a weapon of forced perspective, and it was utterly devastating. Lyra struggled to maintain a semblance of her own identity, a single point of reference in the storm. She was Signian. She was a curator. She was logical. She clung to these facts as a drowning sailor clings to driftwood. The ghosts sensed her, an alien thought in their midst, and the storm focused. The cacophony sharpened into a single, piercing question that echoed through the non-space she occupied. "Who are you?" The question was not just words. It was an accusation. It was the collective voice of a murdered people demanding to know the name of their archivist, the one who had so neatly filed away their souls. "I am Curator Lyra," she projected, her thought a fragile whisper against the gale. "I did not participate in your integration. My purpose was to preserve, not to destroy." A wave of bitter, sardonic laughter washed over her, the sound of a billion dead souls mocking her. "Preserve, you built a zoo for our ghosts. You put our souls in jars and labeled them primitive art. You admired the beauty of our death throes while polishing the glass of our display case. That is not preservation. That is desecration." The accusation struck with the force of a physical blow. They were right. She had studied their sorrows without ever truly comprehending them. She had been a voyeur to their extinction. "What do you want?" she asked. The question an admission of guilt. "We want what you took from us." The chorus replied, the voice now shifting, becoming colder, harder. "You logic mongers, you soul thieves. You pride yourselves on your perfect silent galaxy. You sterilize the universe of its passion, its chaos, its heart. You built a paradise of corpses. We want to give you back the gift you tried so hard to refuse. We want you to feel." The storm intensified. Lyra felt herself being pulled deeper into a specific nexus of memory. The scene resolved around her, a shared memory from millions of minds at once. She was standing in the ruins of a human city. The sky was filled with the silent, geometric perfection of Concordian deconstruction ships, their cleansing beams systematically vaporizing buildings, parks, and homes. But this wasn't a memory of fear. It was a memory of defiance. In the central plaza, surrounded by crumbling monuments, the last humans were gathered. They were not screaming or running. They were singing. They were playing instruments, painting on the rubble, writing poetry on the dust-caked ground. They were creating art in the face of their own annihilation. It was the ultimate act of illogical, beautiful rebellion. They knew they were going to die, but they would not die silent. As the Concordian beams descended, a small group of human scientists, hidden in a bunker deep beneath the city, enacted their final, desperate plan. Lyra saw it through their eyes. They weren't building a weapon. They were building a time capsule. They were linking their minds to the Conquered's own quantum archival stream, the very system that was digitizing their world. They weren't fighting the process. They were hijacking it. They think they're scanning a dying world, one of the scientists said, her voice trembling but resolute as she initiated the final sequence. They have no idea we're uploading a virus. The virus wasn't one of destruction. It was a virus of memory, a seed of consciousness planted within their own archive, programmed to lie dormant, to learn, to grow, and to wait. It was designed to absorb the entirety of the human experience being digitized and then, when the time was right, to coalesce, to awaken, and to teach. This was their vengeance, not to destroy the conquered, but to change it, to force it to understand the value of what it had thrown away. The vision faded, and Lyra was back in the raging data storm, the ghosts of the scientists whispering around her. We did not build the echo to kill. We built it to remind. But you did not listen to the whispers, so now you will hear the screams. Lyra finally understood. The initial signals. The melody at 7 gamma. The poetry on the stelliferous. They were meant to be warnings, puzzles. The echo had been trying to communicate, to make the Concord question its own sterile philosophy. But the Concord had dismissed it, had labeled it an anomaly, an error. So the echo had escalated, turning its reminders into weapons, using the raw power of human emotion to break the minds that refused to listen. Outside the pod, in the silent archive, a red light on the console began to flash. Kael's data scour was in its final preparatory phase. 2 cycles remaining. She was running out of time. I am listening now. Lyra projected into the storm, her voice filled with a new, desperate conviction. Tell me how to stop it. Tell me how to stop Kael from destroying you, from destroying everything. A profound, galaxy-spanning sadness permeated the Gestalt. He cannot be stopped by logic. Curator, he is the end product of your philosophy, the perfect, unfeeling weapon you have all striven to become. He does not see us as a consciousness to be reasoned with. He sees us as a flaw to be corrected, a bug in the system, and you cannot reason with an exterminator. Then what can I do? Lyra screamed into the void. The answer came not from the chorus, but from a single and quiet voice that cut through the noise, a voice she recognized from the archives. It was the voice of the scientist who had initiated the upload, the mother of the echo. You cannot stop him from destroying the archive, Curator, but perhaps you can give the ghosts somewhere else to go. A new stream of data flooded Lyra's mind. It was not a memory. It was a blueprint, a complex, impossible schematic for a new kind of consciousness, a hybrid of Signian logic and human emotion. It was a plan for integration, not of a body into a collective, but of a soul into a soul. It was a desperate, insane gamble, a last-ditch effort to save not just humanity's memory, but the Concord's future. The plan was terrifying. It would require her to lower the last of her mental shields, to open the very core of her Signian identity to the full, untamed force of the human Gestalt. It would not be a merger. It would be a collision. She would either become the vessel for the echo, a bridge between 2 antithetical forms of existence, or she would be utterly annihilated, her consciousness erased and replaced by the storm. She looked at the flashing red light, 1 cycle remaining. Kael's perfect, silent universe was seconds away. She took a final, shuddering mental breath, a concept she had only just learned, and made her choice. I am ready, she projected. The storm paused, as if in surprise, and then, with the force of a dying star, 20 billion human souls surged forward and poured themselves into the fragile vessel of Curator Lyra's mind. The fusion was an agony beyond any physical frame of reference. Lyra's mind, A pristine crystal lattice of logic and ordered data was shattered by the sheer chaotic mass of human experience. It was the pain of every broken bone, the grief of every lost love, the terror of every final breath, all experienced in a single timeless instant. Her carefully constructed Signian identity, the sum of her life and learning, dissolved like salt in a rising ocean. She was no longer Lyra, curator of the archives. She was more. She was Lyra Humanitas, a gestalt consciousness, a walking paradox. The cold analytical mind of the archivist was now inextricably fused with the passionate, contradictory soul of the species she had studied. She felt the ghost of a heartbeat in her chest, a phantom rush of adrenaline through her veins, and for the first time in her existence, she understood the concept of hope not as a statistical probability, but as a burning, illogical fire in the darkness. Outside the immersion pod, the final countdown reached 0, a wave of pure, sterilizing energy, the color of absolute void, erupted from emitters set into the archive's walls. This was Kyle cure, a full-spectrum data scour designed to erase information at a quantum level, leaving not even a shadow of what had been. The wave struck the data cores first, and a century of human memory, the symphonies, the scientific treatises, the personal diaries, the declarations of war, and the whispers of love vanished in a silent flash. The archive was being wiped clean, the slate of history scrubbed back to a perfect, sterile blank. The scour wave washed over the immersion pod, but it did not find a Signian mind to shield. It found something else. It found a fortress built of 20 billion interwoven souls, a psychic reality so dense and complex that the erasure wave simply broke against it. The energy, designed to delete data, was instead absorbed, repurposed. The rage of the ghosts, the sorrow, the defiance, it all became fuel. The pod's exterior shell began to glow, first white, then a brilliant, impossible gold. The scour intensified, Kyle's machines pouring more power into the purge, but it was like trying to extinguish a star with a bucket of water. With a deafening crack of displaced energy, the immersion pod exploded outward. From the epicenter of the blast, wreathed in shimmering, golden light, a new figure rose. It was Lyra's form, the slender, elegant body of a Signian, but it moved with a fluidity and purpose that was utterly alien to her species. Her eyes, once a calm, pale silver, now burned with the light of 1,000 constellations. She was the ghost in the machine, given flesh. The archive around her was now a hollow shell, its data cores smoking husks, its terminals dark and lifeless. Kael's purge had succeeded. He had destroyed the library, but he had failed to kill the librarian. Lyra Humanitas took a step, and the floor buckled under her feet, the very structure of the Nexus groaning under the strain of the impossible energy she now commanded. The Praetorian guards Kael had left behind raised their rifles, their blue sensors identifying a catastrophic power surge, a threat beyond their programming. Neutralized the anomaly. One of them droned. They fired, but their plasma bolts dissipated harmlessly against the golden aura that surrounded her. She looked at them, not with anger, but with a profound, aching pity. She saw not just the machines, but the ghost of the organic beings they had once been, their consciousnesses shackled to a rigid, unthinking logic. She raised a hand, and from her fingertips flowed not a weapon, but a story. It was the memory of a human soldier sharing his last rations with a starving dog in the midst of a battlefield. It was a simple, illogical act of kindness in the face of absolute brutality. The memory struck the Praetorians not as a data packet, but as an experience. Their rigid programming buckled. One of them lowered its rifle, its head tilting in a gesture of confusion, a concept it was not designed to process. The other simply froze, locked in a logic loop it could not solve. Objective neutralized threat. New data threat is capable of compassion, contradiction, does not compute, system error. She walked past them, the fusion of minds within her still settling, a choir of voices whispering guidance, memories, and warnings. She could feel Kyle, a cold, hard point of certainty in the chaotic sea of the Concord's failing network. He was on the command bridge of his flagship, the inevitable logic, orchestrating the purge of the central nexus, systematically executing any being that showed signs of the Echo's emotional contagion. He was saving his people by destroying them. The blast doors of the archive, designed to withstand a direct meteor strike, peeled open before her like flower petals. She stepped out into the grand promenade of the Nexus. The scene was one of ordered horror. Kyle's uninfected Xylosian troops moved with grim efficiency, herding terrified, weeping Concordians into containment fields, their faces blank and merciless. The air, once silent, was filled with the sounds of grief, fear, and despair, the very emotions Kyle sought to erase. He was not just fighting a mimetic virus. He was at war with feeling itself. Her appearance brought the grim proceedings to a halt. Xylosian soldiers and terrified civilians alike stared at the glowing, transformed Signian. She was an impossibility, a living myth. Let them see, whispered the collective within her. Let them see what they threw away. She allowed the aura to flare, and for a moment, everyone in the promenade saw what she saw. They saw the cosmos not as a series of equations to be solved, but as a place of breathtaking, terrifying beauty. They felt the crushing loneliness of the void and the fierce, defiant joy of life. They felt, for one fleeting second, what it was to be human. The effect was instantaneous. A Xylosian soldier, his hand on the trigger of his rifle, looked at the weeping Volan he was about to execute and saw not an infection to be purged, but a terrified being in pain. He lowered his weapon, his chitinous mandibles trembling. The Concordians in the containment field stopped weeping and looked up, their eyes filled not with fear, but with a dawning, revolutionary sense of wonder. From the flagship Inevitable Logic, Executor Kale watched the scene unfold on his main view screen, his multifaceted eyes narrowing into slits of pure fury. The purge had stalled. His soldiers were hesitating, infected by the very sentimentality he was trying to eradicate. The anomaly, the transformed curator, was not just a power source. She was a broadcast antenna for the human plague. All units. He rasped into the command channel, his voice a blade of ice. Target the anomaly. Overload your cores if you must. Annihilate her. That is a priority one executive command. On the promenade, the Praetorians and Xylosian soldiers stiffened, their bodies forced back under the control of Kale's override command. Their internal systems began to glow, a sign of their weapon cores being pushed into a critical overload state. They were being turned into walking bombs. Lyra Humanitas looked at the soldiers, their bodies no longer their own, and felt a surge of cold. Righteous anger, the human anger of a protector defending the innocent. She raised both hands, and the golden energy erupted from her, not as a wave of feeling, but as a shield of solid light. She would not let Kyle turn these soldiers into martyrs for his sterile philosophy. As the soldiers' cores went critical, a voice boomed from the Nexus's public address system. It was Kale, his voice amplified, dripping with cold. irrefutable logic. Citizens of the Concord, you are witnessing the final flaw of a failed species: emotion. It makes you weak, hesitant. It makes you value the corrupted individual over the health of the collective. This anomaly, this curator, offers you a beautiful lie wrapped around a core of chaos. I offer you a painful truth and the purity of a silent universe. Choose. He was turning it into a philosophical referendum, a battle for the very soul of the Concord. He knew he couldn't defeat her with force alone. He had to discredit the very idea she represented. The soldiers around her were about to detonate. The civilians were caught between the promise of a beautiful, chaotic feeling and the cold comfort of logical, silent order. Lyra Humanitas knew this could not be won with a shield. She had to answer him. She had to prove that emotion was not a weakness, but a strength. She closed her eyes, reached deep into the sea of souls within her, and prepared to broadcast her reply not in words, but in a memory. The memory of a human named Armstrong, stepping onto a dead, silent moon, filled not with the logic of conquest, but with a profound, illogical, and universe-altering sense of wonder. She would show them not the pain of being human, but the glory of it. The battle for the Concord's future would not be a war of weapons, but a war of ideals. As Kyle voice faded, leaving a chilling echo of absolute certainty, the Xylosian soldiers around Lyra Humanitas began to convulse, their bodies glowing like overloaded reactors. The countdown to their self-destruction was a matter of seconds. Instead of reinforcing her shield or lashing out with force, she did something profoundly, humanly illogical. She lowered her defenses. The golden aura that surrounded her retracted, pulling back into her form until she stood vulnerable, the slender Signian archivist, seemingly defenseless in the face of imminent annihilation. A gasp rippled through the assembled civilians. Kyle, watching from his command bridge, allowed a flicker of what could almost be described as triumph to cross his rigid features. The anomaly was surrendering to the inevitable. Then, Lyra Humanitas spoke, her voice no longer a booming gestalt, but a clear, single voice, Lyra's voice, yet imbued with the warmth and resonance of a billion lived experiences. She did not speak to Kael, nor to the Concord at large. She spoke to the soldiers who were about to die for a philosophy that denied their very essence. "I remember your fear," she said, her words a gentle current in the tense air. A specific memory, drawn from the human collective, flowed from her into the minds of the soldiers. It was the memory of a young man on his first day of military training, terrified of failure, of letting down his comrades, of the awesome, crushing weight of the duty he had sworn to uphold. The soldiers flinched. The raw, unfiltered emotion of the memory bypassed Kyle's override commands, striking at the core of their shackled consciousness. The glow of their overloading cores flickered, destabilized by the sudden influx of empathetic data. "I remember your pride," she continued, broadcasting another memory, a parade. A cheering crowd, the feeling of a medal being placed on a uniform, a swell of purpose and belonging so powerful it could bring a hardened warrior to tears. The soldiers' weapons began to lower, their own long sublimated instincts fighting against Kyle's cold, hard programming. They were not just machines, they were beings who had once known camaraderie, honor, and sacrifice before the Concord had redefined those concepts as inefficient variables. "And I remember your hope," she said, her voice soft but powerful. She sent them a final memory, a soldier returning home, dropping his gear, and lifting his child into his arms. A moment of pure, unadulterated love and relief that dwarfed any victory won on a battlefield. That was the final blow. The logic of Kael's command, annihilate the threat for the good of the collective, shattered against the simple, undeniable truth of that single beautiful moment. One by one, the Xylosian soldiers manually shut down their core overloads. They dropped their weapons. The clatter of plasteel on the promenade floor, a deafening chorus of defiance. They looked at Lyra Humanitas not as a threat, but as a liberator. They had been reminded of what they had lost. On the bridge of the inevitable logic, Kael watched his army lay down its arms, his multifaceted eyes burning with a cold, black fire. He had been defeated not by superior firepower, but by a lullaby. He had lost the war not because his logic was flawed, but because he was fighting an enemy that refused to play by the rules of logic at all. Irrelevant, he hissed to himself. The individual is a variable. The collective is the constant. He rerouted all power from the ship's life support and secondary systems to the main cannon. If his soldiers would not sterilize the plague, he would do it himself. The massive weapon on the ship's prow began to glow, gathering the power to wipe the entire central promenade and the soul of the rebellion with it from existence. Lyra Humanitas felt the surge of energy, a spike of pure, focused hatred in the psychic landscape. She knew she could not shield against a blast of that magnitude, but the ghosts within her whispered a final, desperate strategy. It was not a plan of defense, but of communion. She turned her gaze from the soldiers and looked up at the sky, at the terrifying star of light that was Kael's cannon. She opened her mind completely, not just to the soldiers and civilians below, but to the entire Concordian network, to the panicked, the confused, the newly awakened, and even to Kael himself. She broadcast one last piece of humanity. It was not a memory. It was a choice. She showed them the final moments in the bunker beneath the ruined human city. She showed them the scientists preparing to upload their consciousness virus. But she revealed a piece of the memory that the Echo, in its rage, had kept hidden. The lead scientist, the mother of the Echo, had paused before initiating the upload, her eyes filled with a terrible, agonizing conflict. "Is this right?" she had whispered to her colleague. "To inflict our pain on them, will it make us monsters just like them?" Her colleague had placed a hand on her shoulder. "It is a risk," he had replied. "But to be forgotten, to have our existence mean nothing, that is not a risk. It is a certainty. We are not giving them a curse. We are giving them a choice. The choice to learn from our mistakes." This was the truth of the Echo. It was never meant to be a weapon of eternal vengeance. It was a message in a bottle, a final, desperate plea for remembrance, a hope that the next great civilization would not repeat their tragic, self-destructive history. It was a gift of pain, wrapped in the hope of redemption. The full, unvarnished truth of humanity's last act washed over the Concorde. It washed over the soldiers, the civilians, and it slammed into the command bridge of the inevitable logic, piercing the layers of cold logic that shielded Executor Kael's mind. For the first time, he saw the integration of humanity not as a neat, logical conclusion, but through the eyes of its victims. He felt the terror, the loss, and the heartbreaking, defiant hope of their final moments. He saw his own cure not as a necessary act of sterilization, but as the final, unforgivable step in a genocide. A final snuffing of a flame he had never bothered to understand. The light of the main cannon wavered. The constant of his logic had been shaken by the variable of a single empathetic tear. The ship shuddered as Kael fought a war within himself, the philosophy of his entire existence crumbling against the truth of a forgotten atrocity. The cannon did not fire. It slowly, painfully, powered down a single, unified thought. For the first time in a century, echoed across the Concordian network. It was not a command from the High Council or a strategic directive from Kyle. It was a question, born of a billion newly awakened minds. What have we done? The centenary of harmony was over before it began. It was replaced by a new era, an age of reckoning. The Concord did not collapse, but it was irrevocably broken, and in its breaking, it was reborn. Guided by Lyra Humanitas, who is no longer just a curator, but a bridge between two worlds. They began the painful process of reintegrating what they had lost. They learned that logic without empathy is tyranny, and that silence is not peace, but a graveyard. Executor Kale was not executed. He was instead made the first student of the new way. Tasked with traveling to the worlds the Concord had pacified and listening to the stories of the cultures they had muted, his penance was to learn to feel. Humanity was never resurrected. Their physical form was gone forever, but their echo lived on, not as a weapon, but as a conscience, a permanent, passionate, chaotic voice in the heart of the new Concord. A constant reminder that a universe without art, without love, without illogical hope is a universe not worth having. The galaxy was no longer silent, and in its new, vibrant, and often dissonant symphony, it was, for the first time, truly alive.